Well, good morning or good afternoon to all of you. This video is part of the Sew with Liz Club, and I'm recording this ahead of the club, and I will send it together with the link to the recording of our actual club, which is taking place tomorrow. And I thank you all for taking the time to join me. And I hope that we have some real fun and creative times together. Okay, so without any further ado, I am going to share my screen again. And I'm going to show you what we are going to do today in our little video. All right, there is the project that we're going to do, the one on the left-hand side of the screen. And that is a little machine embroidered coaster, or some people call them mug rugs, that I'm going to make a video for you now of how to make that. But before I do that, I want to talk about the one on the right-hand side of the screen. I'm not going to make a video of that because A, I don't have the time, and B, the instructions of how to make that are actually really, really good. So the project on the right is a kind of either or both and. I will give you links to both of these projects during the club, and I will include them in the email when I send you the links to the videos. This one on the right is obviously a little quilted heart block, which can be made into a mug rug, or you can continue with it and make a quilt with it. And we'll talk more about that tomorrow in the club. But let's go back to the project on the left, because this video is specifically about the little machine embroidered coaster. So back to me, and you don't need to see me for very long because I am just going to talk about the project. I have made the mug rug exactly as it came, and I'll give you all the details in the club. This is a free design from Sweet Pea Designs in Australia, and you can simply download it and save it to your stick and take it to your machine. And this is a stitch out of exactly how I did from the instructions and from the design that I downloaded. And I'm pretty happy with it. Okay, I then decided that I would do one that was slightly larger. All right, you can see the one is larger than the other. Now, I had already hooped up my stabilizer, which I'll show you in a moment, in my SQ14 hoop. I have the Janome 15,000, but that's roughly 4.5, 5 inches square. And so I could have made this one even bigger if I had hooped up in a larger hoop, but I was already hooped up with the stabilizer, so I didn't. I just made it as large as I could go in that hoop, which was 111%. And why did I do that? Well, because I figured that if you put a mug of tea or coffee or glass of wine on your little coaster, then it leaves space, a little bit of space for a cookie or a piece of chocolate or something like that. So I decided to make it a little larger. Obviously, when you are doing this at your machine, in the edit screen of your machine, and it doesn't matter what embroidery machine you've got, they've all got one or another editing program. I'm not talking digitizing software, I'm talking editing. So you have the ability to make your designs a little bigger or a little smaller. When I say a little, I mean not from this size to 5 times that size. No, that's not going to work because it's not changing the number of stitches in the design. It's just slightly enlarging it. So on my machine, I'm limited to 20% up or 20% down. And I'm also limited by my hoop size, of course. So it only let me go up to 111%. I may put it into a bigger hoop and make it go up to 120%. I'll see. All right, so I thought I'd mention that first, because obviously if you are wanting a bigger coaster or mug rug, that is possible to do without any software expertise, just following on the edit screen of your machine. Okay, so let's click over to my camera, because as I say, you don't really need to see me. And what I have here is I have the hoop, which is my 4.5, 5-inch square hoop. I have it hooped up with water-soluble stabilizer. Now, I am going to tell you that there are instructions that come with the design, and those instructions are pretty good. All right, I'm just going to show you here. They are pretty good. She calls it her love heart coaster. And they're great, but I decided that I would make you a video because not everybody, and I'm one of them, likes to just read instructions. In fact, I'm really naughty with that because this very first one that I made, I didn't read the instructions. I didn't even open the file that I downloaded. I am a naughty girl. And what I did was I hooped up with cutaway stabilizer. And then realized a bit into embroidering this that, oh my goodness, I've done something wrong. And basically the problem being that I had to cut away my cutaway stabilizer from the finished satin stitch edge of my coaster, which was, let's just say I had to do it very carefully so I didn't trim any of these little stitches in the satin stitch. So like I say, if you're like me and you tend not to read the instructions before you start, you may prefer the video. So what I'm going to do with the video is I'm not going to have you sitting there mindlessly watching the embroidery, the machine embroider. When I've explained something and we're waiting for the next step of the embroidery, I'm going to stop the recording, and then you can do the same when you're watching the video. You can stop the recording, do what that step is, and then switch the recording back on when you've done that. And I think that'll make it a lot easier. Also makes the video not nearly as long and take up as much bandwidth and all the rest of it that goes with that. All right. So the very first thing, as I say, is I have hooped up with water-soluble stabilizer. It is recommended that you use that woven type of water-soluble rather than the sort of plastic film type. And she did recommend as well several layers of water-soluble stabilizer, but I'm not altogether sure that's true. Or for this particular water-soluble one that I've got, I'm not going to worry. All right, so the very first thing that you have to decide is on your colors. And I am going to use pinks, much the same pinks as I've done before. And my thread is going to be pink. So what I have in my bobbin underneath my stabilizer here is I've got a bobbin wound with pink polyester sewing thread. She does talk in the instructions about using a very lightweight bobbin thread, and I did that, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. But then you have to switch it out later when you get to the satin stitch around the edge. You have to switch it out for a thread matching your top thread in your needle. So I thought, well, you know what? I've got a whole bunch of pink bobbins wound. I may as well use them. All righty. So once you've got your bobbin in place and you have got your hooped up, the next thing that she highly recommends is that you pin around your hoop. And I'm going to start here where you can see it in the camera. You take a straight pin and you pin into the stabilizer. Let me hold it up to the camera real close so that you can see what I've done. Do you see that where that stabilizer is coming out between the two halves of the hoop? I've got my hoop under there and the inner part of the hoop. And you're going to put a pin through the stabilizer right there. I only learned about this a little while ago. I've never done it in all the years that I've been embroidering, but oh my goodness, does it make a difference? Well, why does it make a difference? Well, it makes a difference because what happens is when the embroidery starts over here, it does have a tendency to pull the stabilizer in. Now, I've got it pretty tightly hooped, but it still can slip a little through the hoop. And when the pin is there, it can't pull that stabilizer in because the pin is stopping that happening. So really, I can't recommend enough that you do this. So I'm not going to have you watch me pin all the way around the hoop. That's just boring. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording in a moment, finish the pinning, and that gives you a chance also to stop and pause your playback of the video and make sure that you pin around your hoop. Just to mention that unless you were wanting to make your coaster very much larger, the general rule of thumb is to use a hoop closest to the size of the design you want to stitch, because the larger your hooping goes, the more stabilizer, number one, you're using, and that can sometimes be wastage. But secondly, it does tend to warp and shift and slip a little more than when it's in a smaller, more rigid hooping. All right, so let's pause the video and okay, so I'm back. I have now pinned all the way around my hoop. I probably have maybe half an inch, a centimeter or so between all of the pins. It is, trust me, and you will know because you hopefully have now pinned around your hoop as well. You'll know that it is a little laborious, but quite honestly, it makes such a huge difference with pulling and puckering and problems with your embroidery that I actually highly recommend that you do it. Do you have to do it every single embroidery? No, but because Sweet Pea recommended it for this one, I figured, you know what, I'd probably better listen after I read the instructions once I'd begun the project already. Okay, so that's the first thing that you're going to do is pin around it. And the next thing you're going to do, of course, is call the design up onto your screen. I like to gray all except the very first color. And I'm going to move the camera here so that you can see my screen. I have an icon that looks like a flower at the top. And when I touch it, it grays out all except the very first color that's going to stitch or the next color that's going to stitch, which happens to be this blue color. And what that is a placement line for my stitching. And I have got my machine, pink bobbin thread, and I have got a pink polyester embroidery thread in my needle, but it's not actually threaded yet. Now it is threaded. So what I'm going to do is I am now going to stitch that placement line, which tells me where I need to place the next part or the next step, the fabric. All right, so I'm going to do that and have it come around. It's going to look a little bit better and not as bright once we put some other color things. It always shines on the white. And I'm going to bring this forward so that you can see a little better. All right, I am now going to take it back one color, and she recommends that you put a piece of cutaway. So this is just a scrap piece of cutaway over the top. And I probably should have done that before I stitched the heart, but I've only got a small little piece of batting here, and I wanted to make really sure that my batting is going to cover all the areas of my heart. And I think I might just make it. So what I'm going to do now is go back to color number one and stitch it again. So now I'm stitching it through the batting, the piece of cutaway stabilizer underneath the batting, and of course my water-soluble stabilizer at the bottom. Okay, you can see there, it just slipped off the batting. All right, now the next thing that I have to do is I have to cut away all that batting and cutaway stabilizer from around the hoops. I'm going to pull it back a little bit so that you can see it. And I think what I'm going to do just for this moment is switch off some of the lights on the machine because it is kind of distracting me. All right, I think that's a little better. If we need the lighting later on, we will do it. Now, I like to use a pair of duck-billed applique scissors. I find that it works a lot better. Sometimes there's no two ways about it. You just have to take the hoop off the machine, but you are not going to unhoop at all. All right, so there I cut the batting. You may need to cut it in 2 steps. It just depends what angle you're at and how close you can get to that stitching. If you accidentally cut that stitching, don't have a conniption. All right, it's okay, because you're going to come by with more stitching over the top of that, and all is not going to be lost. But I will say to you, do not cut the water-soluble stabilizer, because then your heart is going to be floating, kind of not connected to the water-soluble base. So it is very important that you are only cutting the top here. Now, I know that I'm using the duck-billed scissors kind of the wrong way, and that's because I was doing it that way. If I come to this side of the hooping, I have got the little duck bill part, the round part of the scissors. I've got it underneath, which strictly speaking is the correct way to do it. And you may have one of these pairs of large duck-billed scissors. They're great. These ones happen to be Gingham. I was given them as a gift. I probably would not have paid what Gingham scissors cost, but I was given them as a gift, and I love them. However, I love my mini duck-billed scissors even better. And I do have a couple of these pairs of mini duck-billed scissors still left on my website. So I will talk about it tomorrow. There will be a discount code that you can use to buy a pair of these scissors if you wish. I think I only have 2 pairs left, so it'll be a case of first come, first served. I really, really like these scissors because they help me get in. Let me bring it so that you can see what I'm actually doing here. Do you see I've got a little bit sticking out there? You don't want that sticking out because it may stick out beyond the edge of your satin stitch later on. So here we are. Let's just make sure I don't unthread my machine. Okay, we now have our water-soluble stabilizer fully intact, and we have 2 layers here, the cutaway stabilizer underneath and the batting. It doesn't really matter what batting you use. If you have a super precious wooden table that you're going to be putting a hot cup of coffee on, you might want to put some of that heat resistant batting. I think it's called Thermolan or something like that. You might want to use that. But I'm just using a regular cotton batting. Okay, once you've done that, my hoop is back on the machine, and I am now going to stitch the second color, which is the placement line for my first piece of fabric. And away we go. You can trim that little thread. And you might look at this now and say, well, I can't really see what you're doing, Liz. No, it's a little bit tricky to see because I've got pink thread on. Let me move my hoop forward. Okay, I've got pink thread, and it's a little tricky to see it. But what it's done is it has stitched an area here so that you can put your fabric that you want in that part of the coaster, and that's this pink floral at the bottom. I happen to be using a piece of pink felt because it's kind of just the right size. So now that I know where it's going to go, I can actually lay it onto the hoop, and I can go back and stitch the next color, color number 3, which is basically now tacking down that piece of pink felt. You don't really need tape. You don't really need glue because it's just a small little piece. And I'm going to, once again, bring the hoop forward and cut away this pink felt. And I'm hoping I can do it without taking the, actually, I made a mistake. All right, what they do say to you in the instructions is to cut around the heart, but leave the fabric in the seams. And the seams would be here and here. So I've cut it away there. I'm not going to worry too much, but yes, unfortunately, I do need to take it off the machine, or off the, yeah, take the hoop off the machine. And so obviously I need to cut in there and get into this little part of the top part of this pink fabric and cut away close to the stitching. All right. And I'm going to leave the rest. So actually, let me move this so you can see, that is the only place really at this stage where you cut the fabric. I cut it in error over here. So don't do the same as me. Just cut that top sort of squiggly line and then leave the rest of the fabric, or in my case, the felt, as it is. All right. And now I'm going to go back to the machine and let's just see. It is now going to stitch the top, or actually the middle part of the fabric. Let's see what's going on here. It is now stitching the middle part of the heart. In other words, this part here where it says love you, it's done another squiggly line, and I am going to do it much the same as I did on the second one. I'm going to do it in this pink floral fabric in the middle and the pink felt at the bottom. So once again, I just totally love this feature on my machine. I hope yours has it too, where you can actually bring the hoop forward. You don't have to take it off the machine. And I'm just going to lay that piece of fabric right over the top, knowing that it's going to cover that placement line that just stitched. So now it's stitching color number 5, which is the tack down line for the middle section of our heart. And because these are such quick little stitch outs, I am not going to, gee, one of my pins popped out. I couldn't have put it in very well. So let me just pop the pin back. And then I'm going to bring this forward again. And I'm going to hope, no, I don't think it's worth fiddling and fussing. I'm going to take it off the machine. And once again, you are going to cut away the fabric, but you're going to leave it in the seams on the side. But I do need to cut it where it kind of joins up with the pink felt at the bottom. So that little curvy line is where I'm cutting with my applique scissors. So you can see I cut along there. You can come fairly close to that straight stitching, but try not to cut the stitching. I did on one of them and it wasn't a train smash, because you come by afterwards with this lovely decorative stitch, which kind of straddles over any little teeny tiny problems. And then I also need to cut this at the top. So I'm just going to turn my hoop around and I am going to cut it at the top here. Again, let me just move the hoop around a little bit more. And this is because I only have 2 arms. If I was an octopus, maybe I wouldn't have to keep moving the hoop. All right, so you can see now, let me turn the hoop the correct way. There is, and I'll put this here so that you can see. Bring it down a bit. All right, there is the pink at the bottom. This is the floral in the middle. And now this is the little bit at the top that is going to get covered in pink felt again. And we know that I can have got my little scrap of pink felt and I can put that over that area, knowing that I've covered the whole area. And I'm now going to stitch that down with my pink polyester sewing thread. You could use rayon embroidery thread, that's okay. I just happen to like the polyester because it's a little stronger, and it means I don't really need to change it because I'm going to be able to use it more or less throughout unless I decide to change a color. All right, so let's see if I'm going to be lucky enough to not take the hoop off the machine. Nope, I don't think it's worth it. It's a fiddle, so we'll take it off. And I am once again going to cut away these little bits of felt. And of course, the smaller the piece of fabric that you put on, sometimes the fiddlier it can be to get a hold of it to cut close. But if you're like me and you don't like wasting fabric and you like to use little scraps, it just takes a little more care and you will get there. All right, and then I do believe that what we need to do next is we need to do our decorative stitching. And I'm going to do it in the same color I've been using. And this goes down the bottom, and it is now going to do that decorative stitch. And it's going to take a little while to stitch the decorative stitch, color number 8. And then at color number 9 is going to be the decorative stitching at the top of the heart. So I'm going to switch the video off now so that you can do all of that and catch up the steps that I've been showing. And we'll come back once the decorative stitching is done for the next step. Okay, so at this point, we have stitched both sets of decorative stitches below and above the middle section of the heart. And we are ready now to stitch color number 10, which is the Love You writing. Okay, so I want to change my color thread for that because I'm thinking that this pale pink thread is not really going to show up so terribly well. So I am going to choose a slightly darker pink color. I didn't want to go with anything too red because my fabrics are pink. So this is a sort of plummy, pinky color. And so I'm going to thread up my machine with this color. I'm not changing the bobbin thread at this time because it's still pink and I'm good with that. So I'm just threading up my needle with this new color thread. If you're happy with the color you were using, you can continue using it. You don't have to change it at all. So there we go again. And again, I'm going to stop the video because you will know that letters or alphabet takes quite a while to stitch out. So I'm going to pause the recording again and we'll meet back up again when the Love You has been stitched. But before I do that, and before you've gone too far with your embroidery, I do want to mention that if you prefer, you don't have to use this Love Me part of the embroidery design. You can, no problem at all, substitute it for some lettering, maybe a name or your own Valentine's sentiment. I'm just using lettering that came with this design. I actually quite like it. And I thought about making another one with a different lettering, and my mind kind of went blank on what I would put in. So you'll come back again and meet together once all the stitching of the lettering is done. Okay. So we're back after stitching our letters on our heart coaster. And the next step involves you taking the hoop off the machine and turning it over to the back. Now, just take care that you don't push down on this hard, because if you do, you might unhoop, and that is always a little bit of a disaster. All right, so you will see on the back, it looks a little untidy, but it doesn't matter because we're going to cover everything up. So what we do at this point is we are going to lay our fabric, which is what is going to be on the back of our coaster. We're going to lay that down on the back of the hoop with right side up. Don't put it like that. All right, you want it right side up. I happen to be using much the same fabric as the front, the middle part of my heart, but you don't have to. Now, obviously, we have to tape this in place because it could flip and flop around and get caught up. So very gently, don't press down hard because you may unhoop your hoop. Press down gently and you're going to tape this fabric in place. Now, I'm using a Kimberbell tape, which I got from the wholesaler. Basically, I think, without knowing who manufactured this other than Kimberbell sells it, it looks to me like surgical tape. I don't know the price of surgical tape because I just bought this from a wholesaler. However, there are stores, most embroidery stores would be able to get this for you. And there are probably other brands on the market. I was looking and bought something recently at my wholesaler, same place I bought the Kimberbell tape, and I found this, and it says Maker tape, and it's got 2 rolls in it. It was a good deal cheaper than the Kimberbell one. In fact, they were out of stock of the Kimberbell one, and this is what it looks like. It looks a little bit more like tape, you know, sticky tape, but it is supposed to tear much easier. All right. Whereas you can see this one often tears at a sort of funny angle like that. So I thought, okay, well, let me give it a try. I'm not 100% sure if I prefer it. It seems to stick and do the taping job just as good as the other one. But they did say that's why it was so reasonably priced. They were discontinuing it. So I wouldn't waste a hang of a lot of time asking your local quilting or sewing machine store to get it for you. It may actually no longer be available. But I just wanted to make the point that there are, oh gee, quite a few of my pins are falling out. I couldn't have pinned them in too well. Okay. You know, there are other brands available. You could, in a pinch, use magic tape. You know, your transparent tape that you use to stick things around the house and the office, but it is not going to tear away and come away from the fabric. And I can't guarantee whether it'll leave stickiness on your fabrics. You can use masking tape as well, but the same reason I don't use the masking tape. I tend to use this particular brand. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change my thread now, simply because I want it to be the paler color that I used earlier. So I'm switching back. That is optional for you. If you want to carry on with the same color that you used for your alphabet, the love me part or love you part, that is also totally fine. It's your coaster and you can make it with whatever colors you like. All right, so let me thread my needle up. Now, effectively, what is happening is I've got that fabric taped on the back, and now I'm going to sew through all the layers together. I'm not trimming around the edge here yet. I'm just going to sew. So it looks very much like the same stitching we did right at the beginning. It's going to stitch around the outside edge of the heart. Yeah, I think it's actually better without my light on. All right, so at this point, now that we have got it stitched all through all the layers, we are now going to cut away all the fabric on the outside of that stitching that's just been done. And we're going to do it on the back as well. So we'll come back in a moment. You've seen me cutting away on the front. So let me show you how I cut away on the back. This surgical tape or Kimberbell tape or whatever brand tape you're using, I know that a lot of the machine companies and embroidery companies have got their own version of this. So if you are at all frugal like I am, and you visited me in my sewing room, you would see a whole lot of these little pieces of tape stuck to the edge of my table. A little comical, but you know, sometimes you can use them 2, maybe 3 times before they get a little bit fuzzy with you know, the bits of fabric, and then I just throw them away. So here we are. I'm going to cut all the way around, and I'm hoping you can see in the camera. I'll try and keep my hands out of the way. All right, I've cut off a piece of fabric, and I'll tell you in a moment what I do with all those little pieces that I cut off. And again, you can cut up to the stitching. Try not to cut the stitches, but it's not the end of the world if you do, because we're going to come over the next color of the embroidery is a satin stitch. So it's going to cover over all of those little things. Now, I do want to mention that, yes, we want to avoid cutting the stitching that we've just done in color number 11. However, we don't want to leave so much fabric sticking out beyond the stitching that it's going to stick out beyond the satin stitch. So you do want to get fairly close. I would say sort of 1 or 2 millimeters away from the stitching. Don't cut further away than that. All right, so now I've flipped the hoop over. I'm going to put it on pause and give you time to finish the rest of your cutting, your trimming on both the back and the front. Take care not to unhoop your hoop, and we'll be back for the last 2 parts of our project. Okay, one of the important things that I didn't mention before that little break was that it's more important not to cut that water-soluble stabilizer. You're kind of in trouble if you cut that. I have now cut all the way around my heart, and you probably have done the same. And we did it, I showed you on the back. You cut away the excess fabric, which is forming the underneath of the coaster. All right, so now what we're going to do, and again, I'm going to pause it after it gets going, because you don't want to sit watching the video. You want to be doing the same thing at your embroidery machine, and we will reconvene again when the satin stitching is finished. Satin stitching always takes a bit of time because it lays down some underlay stitches first. This one is actually interesting because it's doing some sort of little backwards and forward straight stitching, and then it does a round of zigzag or sort of almost like that lightning stitch, and then thirdly it does the satin stitch. So it actually does take a fair bit of time. So I'm going to let it just run with my pale pink polyester embroidery thread, and we will reconvene once your satin stitch is finished, and I will show you the next step, which is actually the very last color stop, or the very last embroidery step at the machine. See you back here in a few minutes. Okay, so here we are back again. I have now done my satin stitching all the way around the edge, and I want to switch my pink color for this variegated color. I quite like what it looks like with that slightly darker stitching in the satin stitch. There are quite a lot of digitizing companies that do this. They do a straight running stitch, sort of almost like a triple straight stitch on top of the satin stitch, and it gives it quite a nice look. Now, I do, while I'm actually changing the thread color from my pink to this variegated, I want to mention something that, do you remember way back when we cut away the cutaway stabilizer and the batting on the top of the hoop? In the instructions, in Sweet Pea Designs instructions, they did say to go to the back of the hoop and cut away the water-soluble stabilizer inside the stitching around the heart. And I did not tell you to do that because, quite frankly, I didn't do it. And it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me to do it, because when I wash the coaster, that's going to wash out. So, you know, you can do it if you want, but I don't quite honestly see the point. All right, so here we go. I just thought I'd mention that in case you think, well, why did Liz leave that out? Okay, as I say, you're perfectly at liberty to do it. So I've now threaded up with the variegated thread, and the very, very last step of this embroidery is to stitch around it, and you can see it stitching right on top of the satin stitch, and it's going to go all the way around. And I am not going to stop the video again because this really doesn't take very long. And I will tell you while it's stitching that once that is done, the next step is to remove all these pins. So I'll just show you now. I shouldn't really be doing it until the embroidery is finished, but you're going to remove all of those pins, and you're going to unhoop the entire water-soluble stabilizer and the heart. And then you're going to come by and you're going to cut away maybe 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch on the outside of the heart. You can just cut that water-soluble stabilizer. Now, if by any chance you had used a different type of water-soluble stabilizer, the more plastic film type, that tears away, which is why they recommended, and I recommended, that you use this non-woven type of water soluble. That will not tear away from the edge, which is why we are going to cut around the edge. And then this goes to your wash and basin in your bathroom. I tend to do those sort of things there, and rather than at my kitchen sink, because I never know when there's a spot of oil or grease or something that, you know, I never cleaned up. And then that might get onto my embroidery, and I don't want that to happen. But anyway, if you're lucky enough to have a wash basin, a sink in your laundry, I do not. That's why I use it in my bathroom. But if you're lucky enough to have that, obviously you can do that there. So here we go. I have taken it out of the hoop, and there is my heart finished. The embroidery's finished. And I just wanted to tell you a couple more things. Obviously, I'm going to cut away close to the heart, all right, like I've done there. And what do I do with all these little bits of water-soluble stabilizer? Well, some of the bits are fairly large. You can see that. So I can certainly, let's say I want to make another coaster. All right, I can make another coaster, and I can use that as an extra layer of water-soluble stabilizer. Now, I told you in the video earlier that I only put one layer, and I'm looking, and it did not split right on the edge, but it was starting to take strain, which was probably why Sweet Pea Designs said put more than one layer of water soluble. I happen to really like this water soluble, and so I know it behaves very well, even with you know, doing standalone lace where you've got a stitch count of like 80,000 stitches or more. I know that it stands up pretty well, so I didn't do more than one layer. But you can keep these biggish pieces for things like that, but small pieces like this here that maybe are not very big and are certainly not going to help me in a hooping, you can use these for buttonholes. When you're making a buttonhole on a garment, and you pop it between the two layers of fabric, and it stabilizes the buttonhole and makes that stitching, or the satin stitching of the buttonhole, much, much neater. And then if you've got really small pieces, what I do is I put them onto my rotary cutting mat, and I'm pretty sure I've done a video of this, and it's on my YouTube channel, which is So with Liz. And I took my rotary cutter and I just sliced in every which way direction until they were small little pieces of this water soluble stabilizer, almost not quite confetti, but small. And I then put that in a zip seal bag. And when I need to spray something and stiffen it, I put that into a little spray water bottle, fill it up with water, and give it a jolly good shake to dissolve the water soluble stabilizer. And then I spray things. You know, it's an alternative to best press, and it will give you a little bit more of a stiffness than best press, depending on how much of this you put into the water. Now, I am going to tell you that if you leave it there standing for a long time, like weeks and months, sometimes you might have something kind of a bit odd floating in the spray bottle. That because sometimes the stabilizer kind of goes a little bit mildewy. So I just fished them out and gave the bottle a good shake. The other thing that you do need to bear in mind is that it's quite a lot more gluey than something like Best Press. So you will need to, from time to time, take the lid off your spray bottle and give it a good rinse out and sort of kind of unclog it from the glue, because you'll be spraying and nothing's happening. All right, so that's just some tips for you about how to recycle all these bits of stabilizer. I will tell you that I've been doing it with cutaway stabilizer as well. When you do a big hooping and you've got loads of cutaway and strips and things like that around that you're cutting off, it just breaks my heart to literally throw that in the bin. First of all, it's ending up at the landfill. And secondly, I just see my dollars going into a bin. So what I did was I asked my granddaughter to sit at the sewing machine and sew them all together with zigzag stitching. And she did that, and she made nice big sheets for me. I showed her how big I wanted them. And so she just sewed strips of them together. And then sometimes she put strips, along the sides to get it to the size that I wanted for my big hoop. And then basically I've recycled my cutaway. It's actually been sewn, so it's not going to pull apart while I am doing my embroidery. If you are wanting to, and I do it with a white thread, she did it with a white thread for me. If you wanted to, you could do it with a water-soluble stabilizer, water-soluble thread. But if it's a cutaway, it's staying there. I don't mind the stitching being in it. So again, that's another little tip for you about conserving or recycling, upcycling your leftover bits of stabilizer. Tear away, you can sew those bits together again. But when it comes to the tearing away, you might be trying to tear away across some of the stitching that was done, to buckle all those pieces together. And then that's not going to annoy you. But if you want to be really frugal, though, those are some suggestions. And lastly, before I switch the video off, I wanted to show you this little coaster that a friend of mine gave me quite a few years ago. And I don't know where the design came from. She may even have digitized it herself, because she's a real wizard digitizing. And it's got a little more detail to it than the one we did today. But I'm pretty sure it was very much the same principle and technique that we used for our heart coaster today. So thank you for joining in. Be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel. And you can do that below the YouTube video, because this is going to be posted to my YouTube channel. And make sure that you hit the bell. And if you want to leave comments, please go ahead and leave comments too. Let me know if you liked it. You can also let me know if you didn't like it, so that I can make improvements to future videos. So thanks very much for watching. See you again soon at Sew with Liz.